everybody. My name is Mike Moynihan, baseball collector, chasing cardboard, bench clear media, all that fun stuff. To your right, my left, Danny Black, Sports Ball, all things sports ball. I will be on Danny's show tomorrow night. I have to give a shameless plug for that. So hopefully the 4 people that will be interested will show up that we want. And we, of course, got the legend, Rich Klein. How are you, sir?
I am, other than battling a cold, I'm pretty good. And with Danny, he's also a card mensch.
He is a card
and
mensch.
The story you were telling about the hotel room before it just shows what a mensch he really is.
Yeah, mensch. Yeah. By the way, for those of you tuning in, Tuesday night, we do this show every week, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, live for an hour. Feel free to call in. We'd love to have you. Come on, we'll talk about some cool stuff. We got a lot of cool stuff we're going to talk about tonight because it's a busy time in the sports world. But Hobby Hotline is currently at 956 subscribers. So if you're watching and you haven't subbed yet, let's get it to 1,000. I mean, why not? Let us know you're here in the comments. We'll be watching those as we go through the hour. First thing I want to talk about is something that just happened. The MLB draft lottery. For the first time ever, the MLB draft is decided. The top spots are decided by a lottery, very similar to the NBA. And one team, the Washington Nationals should have been number 1 based on record, right? But instead, the Pittsburgh Pirates get the top spot, get the top draft pick. I don't know. Does it really matter between 1, 2, and 3? Maybe I don't know if there's a certain talent.
Well, Pittsburgh has a talent for not doing well, number 1, so maybe it's consistency.
Right.
Bill James once did a study, and he did discover that every pick, there is a sliding scale depending on where you're picked in the draft. Obviously, it's not a perfect science, and sometimes the number 1 pick turns out really well, Ken Griffey Jr., Chipper Jones, and sometimes it doesn't turn out real well. Al Chambers, who was number 1 twice, Danny Goodwin, who was number 1 twice and barely made it. I think Al Chambers was a number 1 pick.
Harold Baines.
Harold Baines. He made.
DJ Sherman.
It's up and down. Some guys. Sean Abner didn't do much. I mean, it's really. Todd Van Poppel was number 1 or should have been number 1, except they wanted too much money. It worked out pretty well. So it is.
Yeah, Rangers moved through that draft lottery process from 7th. Is where they were slotted up to 4. So some teams, I think the biggest disappointment was the A's went from, I don't know, 3rd or 4th to 12th or something. They were pretty pissed off. It looked like the guy looked mad. But it's an interesting scenario, an interesting way to do the lottery. And it was entertaining for the 8 minutes that they drug it on to take. That should have taken.
And I'm sure they'll tweak it a little. Like if you have the worst record in baseball, or the second worst record in baseball, you can't pick less than 5th or 6th or something like that. They probably will make some adjustments as it goes. But I like the concept because it really prevents real tanking. It doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get the best pick.
Right.
David Robinson gets hurt when he's with the San Antonio Spurs. Tim Duncan's going to be the number 1 pick coming out of the draft. They say, oh, we'll tank this year. And then they, basically it helps create the continuation of a dynasty in San Antonio when they have Robinson and Duncan for all those years together, and then Duncan after Robinson retires. So to me, preventing true tanking, you don't have to, the teams rebuild, and that happens. But you don't want to be so bad that it guarantees you a number 1 pick.
Right. That's a great point. We also had the winter meetings are full of baseball activity, off-season baseball activity. One thing I was super interested in was Sunday night when they announced the era committee, the contemporary era committee elected 1 player. Mr. Fred McGriff is going to be a Hall of Famer, and deservedly so, in my opinion. He's long overdue. I think McGriff was always penalized for being in that era, the steroid era. And for all intents and purposes, never looked like he was ever using, like he was always kind of that skinny but strong guy, lean build, and could just punish a baseball. And he was, I think, because he didn't put up those crazy googly eye numbers, he was kind of punished for that. But he was so consistent and so good. Good for Mr. McGriff. Any thoughts, Danny, about that?
Yeah, I know that I'm definitely a smaller Hall guy in general. And so for me, there are already players in there that have lowered the bar lower than I'm comfortable with. So to me, I'm stuck in that in between. Well, they're better than that guy, but I still don't think either one of them should be in. So for me, that's a little bit challenging. Harold Baines, a little bit of a compiler for me. I think I know the Jim Rice arguments are strong, but I think there are better players. And I think one of the things that we need to decide is how many peak years does a player need to really be considered Hall of Fame worthy? Because if you're talking about the steroid era, some of those guys are Hall of Fame worthy. But there are some other guys like Sammy Sosa who I don't think is, but a guy like Albert Bell for a couple of years was much better than the entire league and has better career OPS plus than a whole bunch of the guys. So I'm a small Hall guy, but once you start letting them in, let's let in the right ones. And I think we could have gone a little bit more than McGriff.
Look at you, Danny. OPS plus. Who knew that you were so into the modern stats?
Yeah, a little bit of a dork.
Fred McGriff would have, without the, if ifs and buts were candied nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas, as Dandy Don Meredith would say on Monday Night Football. Without the 94-95 strike, Fred McGriff has 500 homers.
Of course.
And he ended up at 493. 493, for all practical purposes, is 500. He's, as you said, he has never been associated with the steroids. No, he was never the best player on his team. But gosh darn it, by the last few years of his career, everybody wanted him on their team just for what he brought to the team, both in terms of what he could still hit and his clubhouse presence. To me, McGriff is fine being in. I think the bigger issues are the guys that didn't even come close.
Yeah, more of an issue is who didn't get in, and their vote totals, which was everybody else on that ballot, which included obviously Bonds and Clemens. You had Schilling, Murphy, Mattingly, Palmeiro. So those are not small names in the baseball world. And next highest, so McGriff got in unanimously. Mattingly got the next highest vote total, which shocks me. He got 8, 7 for Schilling, 6 for Murphy, and then everybody else 4 or less votes. Rich, what do you think about that?
Well, I will tell you that Barry Bonds is the most interesting case because before any of the steroid stuff started happening, he already had a Hall of Fame career. He would have been in the Hall of Fame if he had just had a normal progression before he even got on the steroids. He was a Hall of Famer. And if you don't like him, it's another subject. If you think he cheated, it's another subject. But he was truly a great player before all that began. A little bit nasty, but a great player. Roger Clemens was a borderline Hall of Famer before he started allegedly doing the steroids. He was in the Catfish Hunter, Luis Tia, Don Drysdale, that group of pitchers where you make it, you don't make it, but you can argue X versus Y versus Z. Curt Schilling, in my opinion, if he would only have kept his mouth reasonably shut. It's okay to have political views. That's not the issue, but it's the extreme way he did that kept him out of the Hall of Fame. If he had just been a little more placid about his political beliefs, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. It's the Hall of Fame, not the Hall of Greatness. I mean, he led several teams to the World Series. He's the co-MVP of the 2001 World Series. He has the bloody sock in 2004. He basically got the 93 Phillies to the World Series. He was your prototypical big game pitcher, and he's a Hall of Famer. But not just his beliefs, but how he spouted them has kept him out of the Hall of Fame. He should have been in already.
Yeah, I mean, if we could teach people to keep their mouth shut, Donald Trump would still be our president. So that's That's not this kind of show, right?
No, we're not talking about people who should keep their mouth shut. But I think it's a valid point on Curt Schilling. Keep your mouth shut sometimes.
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit of a cop out, to be fair. I don't know that Curt Schilling's a slam dunk Hall of Famer, but I'm a very small hall guy.
I did a comparison. I did a stats comparison just for my own edification on Curt Schilling when I was really evaluating his candidacy. This is why I should be on the committee, by the way. But I could argue that Curt Schilling had as good a career as Nolan Ryan. He just didn't do it as long. So, but that's a different story. So Schilling to me is yes, a Hall of Famer. Some people argue Nolan Ryan shouldn't be a Hall of Famer. But the steroid issue, let's talk about that, because what I think is interesting about this issue is it's so polarizing. You either are absolutely not, they cheated the game, all their stats are tainted, all that, you have that side, that camp, and then you have the camp of let him in. And what's fascinating about that to me is somebody made a point on a video that I did. They said, all right, so it's which cheating is it that you don't want in the Hall of Fame? Because where do you go? All right, if we don't want cheaters, if you're in the camp of we don't want cheaters in the Hall of Fame, then about a third of the members would be eliminated for suspected or confirmed cheating. Gaylord Perry, and somebody said that comparing the spitball to steroids is not fair. Okay, it's still cheating, or the entire 2017 Astros team should have their pennant, their World Series revoked. Was it 2017? Is that right? When was the trash can incident?
17, you're correct.
17. So they should none of them should ever be allowed in the Hall of Fame. The entire roster, manager, the whole kit and caboodle, they should all be eliminated. So I think people just get pissed about the tainting of the stats. And I've read studies where, okay, you can hit the ball 10%, 20% farther, or maybe 20% of your home runs that would normally be flyouts because of the additional strength, additional distance that you might get as a steroid user. Believe me, there were plenty of guys that did steroids that didn't hit 755 home runs. 763, whatever Bonds' total was, 763, right? Does that sound right? 73 in a season. How about that? They never did that, and they were on roids. Brady Anderson did hit 50, but you remember that?
I watched it. It seemed totally clean. I got to be honest.
Sure.
Yeah.
But the point is, you don't get to go, well, this cheating's, to me, either I'm not for cheating. I'm just not for dismissing an entire era of the game for the museum that's supposed to chronicle the history and players of the game. So,
and one thing I want to point out is we don't honestly know, whatever Major League Baseball says, we don't know about the baseballs. When I was a young man, back, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, in 1970, Bert Campaneris had 22 homers. He had 65 for a career that went basically 20 years, but he had 22 in one season. Jim Hickman hits 33 homers in 1970. Jim Hickman never, was a 15, 16 a year homer guy. All of a sudden, he hits 33. Casino Gaston has 28 homers in 1970. All these guys have a year. And it's not just a year, it's a year. And what happened in 1970? It's a fascinating year. But there was nobody talked about steroids in 1970. But I'll bet you the ball was juiced a little bit differently.
Well, after the year of the pitcher in 68, right? And then, you had the lowering of the mound. Baseball ebbs and baseball changes the wind, right? They don't just go where the wind blows. They actually change the way the wind blows by making subtle and or overt changes to rules, playing conditions, etc. And so it's kind of like, it is what it is, Do I wish the guys didn't use steroid? Of course.
Can we talk about also the generational? I mean, greenies. I mean, if you read Jim Belton's book, I mean, we're like Mike said earlier, we're just picking which kind of cheating we choose to like and dislike. Cork bats, seem to be kind of charming, but maybe not as charming as spitballs. Spitballs seem to be a lot charming. Betting on baseball seems to be not as charming, even if you bet on your own team. I mean, we just kind of have this made up kind of rule on where we find our ethics on Hall of Famers, and it's inconsistent over time.
Who are we to be the moral police? I'm a fan, and I can tell you Barry Bonds was the greatest baseball player I have ever seen play in my lifetime. And I wasn't around for Mays or Aaron or Mantle or DiMaggio or Williams, but Rich was around for Ruth. But the rest of us haven't seen any of these. Bonds is the best guy I've ever seen. And I'll tell you, Bo Jackson's the best athlete I've ever seen in my life. And Barry Bonds is the best baseball player I've ever seen play.
I wasn't just around for Ruth. I was around for Cap Anson and Ty Cobb.
Wow. Okay. That's really going back. So I appreciate, yes, are the numbers tainted? Yes, they are. But I also don't believe you can go who did and who didn't use. Prove it. Prove to me who didn't use. And if it's everybody or a majority or whatever, can you tell me Derek Jeter never used steroid? I don't think he did. There's never
how about pitchers?
Sure. They're using them too. So if everybody's using, okay. I think people just get butt hurt that the names of Hank Aaron get moved over in the record books, or these great numbers are tainted. Roger Maris is no longer the home run leader. Well, he wouldn't have been this year anyway, because Judge would have beat him. So I just, I have a hard time with people picking and choosing, as Danny put it, which moral high ground you want to stand on. It's like, look,
I have more of a problem with Pete Rose and the gambling, only because as the manager, even though he never bet against the Reds to lose, he didn't bet on them to win every game. So if you're his bookie and you know that Rose didn't place a bet on that game, you start betting on them to lose. You start placing losing bets for you start figuring out that he thinks the Reds are going to lose this game.
But why does that?
Bets accordingly.
I agree that he should have paid a price for that. I don't think it needs to be forever.
And again, if he, to me, he blew it when he got the honor of being one of the greatest living players in the 1999 World Series, and Jim Gray interviewed him. If he had said something to the effect, "I'm so appreciative of the fans, and I know I screwed up, but I'm so glad they still love me, and I'm so grateful, and I'm sorry for what I did, and blah blah blah." I think that would have gotten. I think that was the setup to get him into the Hall of Fame, and he went off the other direction. Again, knowing what to say and how to say it sometimes, and I'm bad at this too, is your key. If he says the right things at that interview, he's in the Hall of Fame in 2000.
Yeah. Here's a quote. Here's a comment. There's no place for PED users in Cooperstown. Then close it down because they're already in there. Sorry. We've got a guest joining us.
Hey, Kevin.
All the way from his kitchen is Mr. Kev Bo Jones. Hey, Kev.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Danny, Mike, Rich.
What's up, Kevin?
Good to see you all. I know I'm screaming into the wind when I say this, but it's, for me, the biggest thing with this, all these generational greats essentially being cast aside and being blackballed from the Hall of Fame is the sheer hypocrisy. And Mike, I commented this on your video last night, but the sheer hypocrisy of the Baseball Writers Association, the sports press, the Hall of Fame committee, to leave out some of the greatest players of the last 25 to 30 years, to make a point or to take a stand when you knew what was going on this whole time, and they turned a blind eye to save the sport after the 94 strike. It's so frustrating. I mean, Manny Ramirez, David Ortiz, McGuire, Sosa, Clemens, Bonds, the countless other guys I'm missing, Sheffield. I mean,
O'Mara.
Who? Which
Palmeiro.
one? Yeah, Raphael, 3,000 hits, 500 homers. I mean, it just the sheer it's the hypocrisy of the writers and the sports press, and the Hall of Fame committee to leave these guys out. I mean, in '98, when McGwire and Sosa were going toe to toe every night, mashing, America was riveted. And baseball, really, since Bonds and since those guys have left, it has not been in the national consciousness, and it has not even been relevant. It's just been really, really frustrating to have these guys left out. I mean, I know, and like you said, it's such a hard divide, but it's really frustrating, and I'm wondering if any of you others feel that there's a bit of hypocrisy with the press and the Writers Association and the Hall of Fame committee.
How about Bud Selig being in the Hall of Fame, who was the commissioner during all of it? Like, tell me that's not the biggest, like, really? Oh, bye, Kev. You didn't have to leave. Did you throw him off of there, Danny?
One thing is there's
No, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
One thing is that as the writers aged, and they actually fixed some of the writers were people who actually were covering baseball, were the ones left voting. They reduced the writing ranks. The BBWA, voting people, they reduced that total. Like, hey, wait a second, we have people who haven't gone to a baseball game in 5 years that are still voting. Probably need to fix that. So when they got, as the younger generations of writers got in, you notice the Bonds and Clemens percent went up. And so I think if both of them had 15 years, they would have gotten in because they were going to hit that number. And again, I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, but they would have made it.
So, Rich, having been around you've been around a while, all right?
Yes.
Would you, if you had a vote on that committee, would you have voted for Bonds and Clemens?
I would have voted for Bonds, and it pains the hell out of me. I definitely would have voted for Bonds. He was a Hall of Famer before that began. And I would have voted for McGriff, because there was never any suspicion, and he has basically the 500 homers.
Okay.
And I think you could vote for 4 people.
Three.
You
could vote for 3.
And then I would have had to think long and hard who my third vote would have been. It probably would have been Dale Murphy.
Danny, who's your 3 votes if you had them?
You didn't have to use 3. I think it was up to 3. I'm probably Clemens Bonds only. And Mike, I know this will freak you out. Mattingly's probably my 3rd.
Wow. Okay. Mattingly and Puckett, very similar career numbers, by the way.
I'm not sure I agree that Puckett's a Hall of Famer either.
Okay. Kevin, who's your 3 if you have 3 votes, if I put you on the committee?
Well, I'm definitely going Bonds and Clemens. I don't have the list in front of me, but I would probably lean possibly towards Dale Murphy, just for how dominant he was in the 80s, in an era when 30 homers was a lot in the 80s. I don't think anybody hit 40 homers in the 80s, maybe once. So I would lean towards Dale Murphy soft, but I mean, Bonds and Clemens, I mean, 2 of the greatest players of the last 50 years, easily.
I would have been Bonds, Clemens, McGriff would be my 3 votes.
Oh yeah, I guess McGriff. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess he was a compiler, and he was a cornerstone of those Braves teams in the 90s. I feel like.
Do we take defense into account?
Of course.
So to me, that is more reason to have Bonds, more reason to have Mattingly, more reason to have Murphy.
McGriff was a pretty good first baseman.
He was a DH.
He wasn't great, but he was a pretty good first baseman. For most of his career, he was a first baseman. I mean, he wasn't Keith Hernandez, but he was competent enough at first base that he was still playing first base at the age of 40.
Here's John Keating's votes: Herb Washington, Oscar Gamble, Morgana as a contributor, I think, and Gary Maddox. So,
well, 2/3 of the world is covered by water. The other third is covered by Gary Maddox.
Well, and I'd like to say I don't know that Morgana didn't have any performance enhancements either. So,
and there's a 6-card, and I've never owned it, but there's a 6-card Playboy card set of Morgana, and I've never owned one, and it's like not a holy grail, but I've seen it, but I've never bought or owned them, and it's a little frustrating.
That's important that you made the caveat that you've never owned one. That's important to point out.
I'm going to hop off, guys, and let you continue. But I think the two guys, too, that really frustrate me, and I think they're both eligible, correct me if I'm wrong, is Ortiz and Ramirez.
Ortiz is in.
Ortiz got in.
Did he get in?
Yeah. Last year.
Yeah, he got in last year.
Okay. Well, then there's the whole argument of why, all the other guys should be in if they were saying, because they suspected him too. So, I mean, I just think of how epic he was with the Red Sox and just how clutch he was. So, but I think, Manny Ramirez, absolutely. I mean, he was a beast in Cleveland too. But yeah, we can shout about this all night, but I wish they just get their heads out of their butts and do the right thing. And I know Sosa's more polarizing than the rest, but God, he was amazing. Hitting the ball off the building across the street at Wrigley and 360 homer seasons and beloved when he was playing. And it's such a bummer, but guys, it was fun to kind of vent and rant and rave, and thanks guys for having me on.
That is awesome. See you, Kev.
I'll see you guys later.
I'd like to just mention one thing. The committee, the final list that they voted on was actually narrowed down from a larger list, and what they described is every year that larger list will start over again. So just because somebody made it to the final list this year does not guarantee that the next time they make it to the final list. So that's just an interesting thing moving forward, that these guys are not guaranteed to be on the final vote again the next time.
And Mike, I know you're engineering, but I'd like you to post DR's comment because I want to say something about that.
Yes.
Okay. Baseball is missing one thing with the Hall of Fame. Basketball has it. Football kind of has it. Hockey, I think, has it. A contributor, i.e. Buck O'Neil, should have been in the Hall of Fame as a contributor. Curt Flood, for what he did, being the face of something that changed the game and really helped trigger free agency, should be in the Hall of Fame as a contributor. That would have gotten Marvin Miller in the Hall of Fame years earlier. And I think baseball, as good as it is, I think they're missing something with the contributors, because there's something where then, I know, Danny, you're talking about a small Hall of Fame, but I think there's a place for people that contribute to the game and really are an important part of the fabric, but just aren't players.
Well, let me be clear. I think it's a museum as well, and there's two different parts that I think we confuse sometimes. What should be represented in the museum and who should be inducted into the Hall of Fame. First of all, Curt Flood, his importance as a whole is undereducated to the baseball population. So that needs to change and educate more people. I believe the museum should reflect almost the entire history of the game, and that should not in any way be whitewashed or any players be left out of that story. Voting into the actual Hall of Fame itself, we took a writer's ballot. We gave the writers 10 years to decide, and then we took another group of writers and just made it a smaller group and asked them to decide again. I think the whole system probably needs a refresh.
What about allowing some component of a fan vote?
Well, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame does that. You don't get a lot of votes, but the leading vote getter does get. They list the candidates, and the leading vote getter does get extra consideration for that.
I would be fascinated to see a public vote. I would do a poll on my YouTube channel, but I'd get 3 votes, so it wouldn't matter. But if you put in put out a poll and see who would vote for Bonds and Clemens. I think, I don't know. I'd be interested to see that.
I mean, I never thought I would, but at this point, I think you have to put Bonds and Clemens in. Not to pick on David Ortiz, but there's been enough guys that I think the door's been open. But now the key thing is not to look at all the steroid players as the same, but look at which one of those were actually better than the other ones. And that's where I think Bonds and Clemens stand out above most of the other players. Although McGuire has sneaky good numbers, I don't think people realize.
Yeah, he does. All right, let's switch gears from the Hall of Fame. I think there's been a lot of talk about it, and it's always fun to talk about it. I'll talk about the Hall of Fame all day, which is why I need to make sure we stay on track here. Free agency is in full swing. We've seen a flurry of signings over the last, really since Friday, when I think the biggest shoe to drop initially was DeGrom to the Rangers, 5 years, $1 bajillion, whatever it was. And that, then Verlander went to the Mets. Now you got Verlander, Scherzer at the top of that rotation. That's scary. And yeah, he's not kidding. Norman's going bananas over here over something. But in terms of cards, we haven't talked about cards at all, really. Card prices during free agency I found it fascinating over the decades. A player signs with a new team. You have this, very short period of, if I'm a Ranger, I'm a Rangers fan. Guess what I have right here? A Jacob deGrom rookie card, so it, and it's sitting on my That 70s Card Show coaster. But I already had that, but I would have been looking for a deGrom rookie, and autographs. And like now as a Rangers, I'm like, whoa. And you can't wait for that first card of that player in their new uniform. If you're a fan of that receiving team, that new team, you're like, oh my gosh. And usually it's Heritage, ironically, because Topps flagship Series 1 is already printed. It's, pretty much. And so they've already got that figured out. And so deGrom's first Rangers card will be probably Heritage, would be my guess. That's historically what it's been. What do you guys think about, the question is, after that rant, is what do you guys think about the card prices during free agency for those players that move teams? Aaron Judge, Verlander, deGrom, go. I'm going to go deal with Norman.
All right, Rich, I think we see the same patterns kind of all the time of there's a little, run up, like with the Judge rumors for a couple of days. If they get serious with him going to the Giants, you're going to see a little bit of a run up. He'll sign. You'll see a couple days, but then I think you adjust back to normal. But I think that pattern
you also have the case where he's leaving New York, the biggest media market in the country. That's a little bit different. Trey Turner's going from the Dodgers to the Phillies. Again, you're leaving a bigger media market. Philly's not a bad market. It's part of the megalopolis, but LA is still bigger than Philly. So it also depends where you go. And collectors, once an important player, and I'm going to call them both important players, once you go to a new team, people only want to have the cards. The Ranger fans only want to have the deGrom cards, for the most part, of deGrom as a Ranger. They don't want to have his Mets cards. Maybe they'll take the rookies.
Does the length of the contract impact that?
No. It honestly, I mean, when Alex Rodriguez signed that mega contract with the Rangers, and I mean, I got quoted in those days in the Dallas newspapers. The interest was all for his Ranger cards. It was, and his rookie cards. So a '97 Flair Alex Rodriguez card was, nobody cared about it because the Seattle people didn't want it anymore, and the Rangers people didn't want it because it wasn't a Rangers card. So it's the middle ground that really becomes interesting. But if you go to a situation that helps your stats and makes you a better player, statistically, that's when your interest may, get pumped up on all your cards. It's where you go, and will that help you get better stats?
Well, I also think there's a built-in base of consumers at the new city. Now, if San Francisco, it might not be New York, but it's a pretty big city. So you've got
where's the collecting in San? When we talk about California collecting, it's Southern California. You don't hear as much about San Francisco collectors as you do. And granted, there's the big Burbank show. There, Southern California is a hobby hotbed. You don't hear the same thing for the San Francisco area. In the 80s, San Francisco was a huge area.
I mean, I think people will still collect Aaron Judge if he goes to the Giants.
Oh, I'm not going to argue that they're not going to collect it.
Yeah.
I just don't think the interest will be the same because he's out of New York.
Well, the question is, in New York, can he top what he did last year, or is it all going to seem downhill?
He doesn't have to. If he hits 45 homers, it'll be a disappointment, but you know what? That'll be perfectly fine. But, the thing is, also, if he becomes a Yankee for life, that also will really help his cards because then he'll really be associated with the Yankees. This way, he'll spend half his career with the Yankees and half with the Giants. And unless he has a great finishing kick, which is very possible, obviously, you lose some of that. You lose some of that interest of being a one-team player.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime a player stays with one team, it's more valuable in the long run. But a two-team player, you can definitely get a bump on that second team if that career is split. But I think the player has to be liked. Machado, I'll use Manny Machado, Baltimore to San Diego. He had no real value even when he was leaving Baltimore because he just wasn't liked that much. I think a guy like Aaron Judge is a lot more beloved, and his value, I think, will carry. Trey Turner, I don't know if people have an emotional attachment since he's bounced around a little bit more.
All right. Well, Trey Turner has definitely bounced around more than these other two people. So, yeah, I mean, you do have that. He's played for 4 different organizations, I think, only 3 in the majors.
Hot investing tip, go buy Cody Bellinger rookies because I'm just kidding.
Actually, talk about a rebound candidate, a former MVP now playing in Wrigley Field.
Yeah.
Did wonders for Andre Dawson.
I view this is actually pretty, I think, astute in terms of comments. Yeah, if especially if you're a Yankees fan and you only love Judge because he's on the Yankees, that's the funny thing about fandom, right? Do you love the player or do you love the uniform he's wearing? And the answer is probably both. But I had the same problem when Josh Hamilton went to the Angels. I just couldn't stand seeing him in an Angels uniform. It just drove me nuts. And so I bought some of his cards in the Angels, but I still liked him and wanted to see him do well. But as a Rangers diehard fan, I just couldn't stomach buying the Angels of all teams are one of our chief rivals, division foes, nah, I'm good.
And that for Hamilton, he was so well cocooned and protected in Texas. That was a really bad mistake on a lot of levels. I know his wife wanted to go there because she wanted to try to become an actress, or his wife at the time. But it turned out to be a terrible move, and that happens sometimes in free agency too.
Yeah.
Can I just make a quick? I'm sorry, Mike. Can I make a quick comment? Will Clark was brought up in the comments. I just want to get everybody's position on the Wally Joyner Will Clark debate.
What's the debate?
Who was better?
Will Clark was better. Disagree?
I think it's a lot closer than people realize. I think Joyner didn't get the publicity.
Will Clark's peak years are definitely better than Joyner's peak years. But their career numbers are pretty similar. But I think the peak of Will Clark is better than the peak of Wally Joyner. Therefore, Wally Joyner had his first 2 years were his best 2 years. He never came close to those 2 years. Will Clark had some really good years all along the way. Plus, he played in some postseasons where I don't think Joyner did. So I think it goes to Will Clark, maybe not by a ton, but by enough where it's obvious.
2 of the prettiest swings ever.
John Olerud's up there too. There's something about left-handed hitting first baseman.
Palmeiro, amazing.
McGriff.
Keith Hernandez.
Darryl Strawberry, Ken Griffey. Nobody ever says beautiful swing with a right-hander.
Yeah, you've noticed that. There's just something about a left-handed hitter swing that is better than a right-handed hitter swing.
I'm remiss. We're 40 minutes into this show tonight. And Danny, you haven't brought up my CFP bound TCU Horned Frogs? What is that all about?
So the truth of it is I've tried to be supportive all season of you. I've texted you after some games. Congratulations. But I never thought that you guys were going to make the college football playoffs, and I find out you did. But I don't know what a horned frog is, Mike. So I'm going to ask you in front of everybody, what is a horned frog?
A lot of people don't know what a horned frog is.
I don't know what a horned frog is, but they're 12-1.
Well, there's a horned frog for you. It is a lizard that has horns on its head, and it will, when it gets mad, it will spit blood out of its eyes. It'll shoot blood out of its eyes. So that is a horned frog. And we now have Hypnotoad, and we all say roll toad now instead of roll tide because Alabama's out. So we just say roll toad. And if
my hot take is Alabama should have been in because they travel better, and they probably would beat TCU.
That's terrible.
And I live in Texas.
Thank you for the education. I feel like I've gotten the full Bill Nye experience now.
I'm still learning things. As I said, I saw Ty Cobb play, but I'm still learning things at my young age.
Well, speaking of money and the money that TCU is going to get paid for playing in the college football playoff, how about the recent valuation for Fanatics? Did anybody else see this? Because it was an eye-popping number of $31 billion. Ruben's just counting. He's just sitting around counting his, bank account, just crazy. That seems absurdly high to me.
Can I ask both of you a question and anybody with financial knowledge? Why are they still raising that much money and giving up part of the company if they're doing so well? And
if you can get other people,
is there churn rate that
why
high?
not? I mean, that's the American way. I mean, look, Elon Musk may be the richest man in the world. He's getting other people to help him pay for Twitter. He could have just written the check without help. I mean, that's the American way.
It's also a financial. They may be worth X dollars. That doesn't mean they have that much in cash to potentially do things that they want to do expansion wise, etc. And so companies raise cash in that way to have cash, to spend cash. And I think that's exactly what Ruben's going to do. He's going to use all $700 million of the recent cash infusion to buy Panini. That's my prediction.
Well, except for the last sentence.
That's a really good move.
and he'll get to keep $695 million of it because that's all Panini's going to cost by the time he gets around to buying it. So,
yeah, no, I think also
$1 billion with a B was just. I'm the one that posted it into our hobby hotline chat, by the way, when I saw the story break today. So, yes, it just was a staggering number. I mean, I know that when the venture capitalist was on Jeremy Lee's show, a collectible show, a few months ago, because I was actually watching that one, and he said Whatnot was worth like $3.7 billion with a B. I thought that was a good number. Well, $31 billion is a little more than $3 billion. But there's real money. I mean, but Fanatics has the money not just from sports cards, but it enables them to do more things in the sports card because if they make a mistake, it's not going to put them out of business. If you ever read Pete Williams' Card Sharks book, written in the 90s, it's also a great history of sports cards. And Topps made some mistake with like double bubble, like in 1979, that almost put them out of business. And they barely survived, by their claws. If Fanatics makes a mistake like they did with Topps Chrome, and they do this wonderful project to make it up to everybody because they didn't put the SPs in the thing, and they're helping everybody. If you have the gold and the Goldschmidt and the Judge cards, it's a blip to them, and it's good for us. It's good for the hobby, but it's a blip to them.
Well, also sports cards is a small portion of their business, getting to the Amazon of of merchandising. So to Mike's point and your point earlier, yeah, I mean it's definitely cash to spend, but there's no guarantee it's card related. And I think we're just a little card centric, and we think that everything they're doing must be related to my next pack, but it could be just jerseys for the upcoming baseball season. Who knows?
Danny, we got a comment directed at you. Apparently, you sounded racist on something you said earlier. I didn't.
Whoa.
I don't know. Just kind of he said that, and I'm like, what did we say that was even remotely that? But whatever.
He's a mensch. I mean, mensches aren't racist.
No, that was a long time ago. We talked about that. Yeah, it's interesting to see this whole Fanatic story that's going to be told over the next 4 to 5 years. It's going to be interesting to watch. Ruben's going to print money. Topps and Panini, we'll see how all that looks. And let's move on to show etiquette, because there's been some talk about one of our colleagues here on Hobby Hotline, Ryan Nolan, had to do it, or didn't have to. He did a video talking about being called out by a show promoter, and I thought it was an interesting idea of something to discuss. Rich, why don't you fill some people in and we can talk about it?
And having been a dealer, I understand all sides of this. Basically, the promoter at the show, John Newman sets up at Lynn Lake in Syracuse, put up a sign saying basically something to the effect that, if I get it wrong, Danny, I know you've seen it and you can correct me. If you bring in cards to sell, please sell them only to the vendors who are paying for the tables. Please don't sell them to people walking around the room. Did I catch that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, the gist of it was, if you're not dealing with the dealer, don't do it in the building. Yeah.
And I understand where he's coming from. Having seen that happen in front of my tables, I get that, because it's frustrating, especially if it's something I would have wanted. And if something I don't want, and you're at my table and you see somebody with the cards, there's even a right way to do it. Hey, I see that you're not interested. Do you mind if I took? No, go right ahead. Talk to him. I'm fine with that. It's not only that, but it's how it's done. As we talked about, our compatriot Ryan Nolan got approached at one of the shows, and I looked, when he put it in his vlog, I looked at the notebook. It's mid-70s hockey's Commons and Stars. I didn't see a Gretzky rookie. I didn't see anything overwhelming. I think there was some junk wax or overproduced wax baseball singles in there. It was, something you pay that person $20, $30, $40, $50 for, if you're in a good mood and it's something you like for inventory. And the promoter basically ripped him a new one for that. And yet, to me, it's how it was done. Looking at that stuff, Ryan may have been the only person in the room who would have been interested in what was in that album.
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous for the promoters. The dealers are paying for the space, for the opportunity. I'm paying to get in the room for the opportunity. And if the opportunity comes at a dealer table, or a guy walks up to me, hey, Mike, I love your show. I got some cards you might be interested in. I'm not going to go, no, I can't do that. You need to offer it to all these guys first. I have just as much right to buy those cards as a dealer does. I get they paid to be there. Congratulations. I paid $10 to be there. Who's the sucker in the deal? And so, but I'm not there to buy cards I'm there to buy cards from dealers, not from people walking around. Have you guys, you have gun shows, Danny, up in Baltimore? Of course you do. You're in Baltimore.
Yes.
So,
I mean, we're not Texas, but
Well, when you go to a gun show and there's guys walking around they're carrying a gun and they have a sign on it and it's for sale, and you can buy it from him or you can buy it from a dealer. There's no,
I always grew up at card shows that, as long as you take it outside or to a private room or something like that, that was always considered okay. That you don't do business on a dealer's table, that's considered rude. To do a third party deal on a dealer's space. But I always grew up, if you take it outside, it's two people doing a trade and a deal out in the parking lot. That shouldn't be an issue at all.
Shouldn't dealers then be just as upset about trade nights? Because
a lot of them are.
Like, think about it. You're taking away from whatever hobby money is in that room during a trade night or whatever. I mean, at the Dallas show, outside in the foyer, and all the chairs are set up and people are out there wheeling and dealing nonstop during the Dallas show.
Well, trade night at the Dallas card show is also in the Starlight room. And there was the guy who sits across from us at in our ComC booth. We just closed down for Saturday night since we're not going to be involved in that. The guy across from us with did $2,500 a couple shows ago. He usually averages about 1,000 during trade night. So some of the dealers are trying to get into the Starlight room because that's where a lot of the trade night is. So some of them, it's actually benefiting the dealers. Now, I want to tell a different story on myself. I was in one of my local card stores, and there was a guy in there, and I knew I had something in my trunk of my car that was right for him. And so I said, you got to come to the car. And then I realized, wait a second, and it was books, by the way. It wasn't cards. I even told the store manager, you can come out and see what I'm going to give him. And he took one look. He says, never mind, you're fine. But the point is, I actually took the customer out of the store for like 10 minutes. So I could give him 13, not even sell him, give him 13 hardcover books.
Yeah. I think you make a good point, Danny, about, doing it there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. I do agree doing it at a dealer's table or not even asking for permission or whatever is probably not a good look. So there's some validity to that. The last thing we want to talk about, or we got a last point, Danny, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. I just wonder in general, and I had a little bit of a different experience, if promoters and dealers relationships and promoters and customers relationships are starting to become more and more separated. I wonder if the promoters aren't defending the dealers too much for fear of losing a table.
So you're saying they'd be more pro dealer than pro?
Yeah, I mean, I saw in the comments John mentioned that sign was in reaction to one specific dealer's complaint. I know Ryan had one specific dealer complaint. I had an issue with one specific dealer. It seems like the promoters are quick to side with the dealers.
Well, would you rather lose?
As a person who's promoted shows, I'm going to make my money selling the tables to the dealers.
Exactly.
My synagogue show, which is now 19 tables, since I'm not paying for the room, it doesn't matter if something screws up in that room. It's like, fine. If 20 people show up, I still make money. But you make money from the dealers coming back every month, and they feel they have the right, since they're coming every month or every 2 months or however often you have your show, to be the ones to have let's call it first call of buying cards. Now, there's another part of this too. In the 1980s, in the Stone Ages, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, my old friend Donnie Lepore, Card Collectors Company, would wheel a suitcase around the floor. He never paid for a table. He had really good stuff. He would sell stuff to the dealers, and the dealers would get mad because I guess sometimes the customers would buy it too, because he was basically making more than some of the dealers and not just paying admission, not paying for a table. So there was that problem too. So at the Philly show, the Willow Grove show, the famed Willow Grove show, for a couple of years, they confiscated every knapsack, every bag, everything when you walked into the room. Talk about a friggin' today. It would be today you would have such an uproar about taking everybody's Pelican case, and everybody would say, "What the bleep are you guys doing?" So it's frankly, it's also unenforceable, and that's the other issue. They tried at the Dallas Card Show a couple times, like 2 or 3 shows ago. Don't bring any in outside food. Well, if I stop and get a sandwich at the deli and bring it in a little bag behind, bring it in a bag where the person can't see it, how are they going to know I'm bringing in a sandwich and a soda and chips? It's not an enforceable rule either.
Yeah, it's true at the National too. You're not supposed to bring. I brought food every day. Like, come on, you can't really. I have a giant backpack. I can put a bunch of stuff in it, right? Last issue I want to discuss tonight in our final few minutes is if you guys saw on Bench Clear, Ty has been chronicling his issue that he's had with PSA. He had a card that he had sent in, a nice Trey Lance die cut prism, blah, 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 number 25, that came back as a different card, completely different card that he had never owned. And I know both of you guys, I think, have seen the videos where Ty discusses it. I think Ty's getting unfairly, like, I don't think it's fair to say, well, you shouldn't use them anymore. Well, it's not that simple, right? You can't just go, look, I'm going to stop using the big, yes, customer service there leaves a little bit to be desired. But to say, well, stop using them, that's your solution, is, I think, misinformed. What are you guys' thoughts about everything?
Rich, I'm going to take this first because I'm going to let you speak for a company that deals with a lot of people. Nobody's 100%. Nobody's 100%. So if you stop using every company that ever makes a mistake, you'll never do business with anybody again. That's just my opinion. There's certain ways to handle things. This sounds like this has not been handled well, and that certainly sounds like it was documented. But that being said, you can't just never use every company that makes a mistake.
And understand, I don't work on this. I work indirectly sometimes. Stefan and Angela are much more involved in this than I am. They sometimes ask for my opinion because I'm old and I've been around since the dinosaurs, as I say, roamed the earth, or, the pterodactyls. And we actually discussed a couple things today. There was one card that was bought a couple years ago. And there's a note now that, hey, now we've discovered since then that not all the signatures are good. On this set, it's an upper deck set. I don't want to go into more detail than that. But all the signatures may be questionable, or there are some questionable signatures. And it was basically, well, he bought it 2 or 3 years ago. We don't know when the note was put out. We'll take that card back gladly. We'll credit it. It's already been credited back, and rightly so, because he bought it in good faith. And to me, it's how you deal with something like that. I always look, if there's a chance, even if it's a 2% chance the customer is right, give it to him or her. Because I don't want to be the one to screw it up. Now, if the customer is 100% off, you can say, hey, dude, really? No. If you bought cards of Jimmy Garoppolo in the first period, the first quarter of the game on Sunday, and he breaks his leg in the second quarter, and then you want your money back. Dude, sorry. You bought it in good faith. That's not on us. But if you bought like the examples that came today, both times the customers had a reasonable case for why they wanted their credit back, and both times it was granted. We're human beings. It's what you do to fix the mistake once you do it. And you don't ask for somebody to sign an NDA, and you don't do that. You make it up to the person. You bend over backwards to say, look, we know we screwed up. We're gonna give you something extra for your problem. Okay, if the card's not, let's give you 30 free grades. It costs maybe $10. If it costs $10 a card to send in cards, whatever it is. And by the way, these 30 cards, because of the screw up, we're not going to upcharge you. It's $10 a card. You send in 30 cards. It's 30 cards for the $300 credit. No upcharge. You're not going to get upcharged. That is your rate. Something like that is a good way of fixing a problem. A lot of people slag on Kenny Golden, but I will tell you that if you look at Net 54, whenever there's been a problem with an item in a Kenny Golden auction and they post it on Net 54, it gets fixed immediately. Kenny's watching Net 54 and he fixes those problems ASAP. A lot of people can slag on Kenny, but a lot of times he's trying to do his best. He's not perfect. I will grant you that. But it's what you do when you make a mistake that really counts.
Yeah, I think Ty's frustrated with one thing that I saw some things. Well, they don't know who you are. They should really bend over. They should do that for everyone, regardless if you're on YouTube or podcast or Instagram. Who cares who you are? You're a customer, period. Right? I shouldn't get special treatment. Ty shouldn't get. He doesn't want special treatment. It's like, hey, do the right thing here. But
the right thing should also be not just a low comp. It should be a screwed up PSA 10 best case scenario comp. He shouldn't have to go back and negotiate that goodwill or deal with the NDA. That whole thing to me is the biggest butchering by far.
I want to leave you with this comment on this. Integrity, which is really what this is doing the right thing, assuming nobody's looking.
Right. And integrity, trust, those are hard things to earn and easy things to lose.
And having screwed up in my life, I will tell you, I agree 100% with that.
And they've done a lot of things to undermine that trust over the last couple of years. You would think they'd want some good publicity right now. They probably don't. The thing is that bothers me the most, I guess, is they don't care what Ty Wilson says or Mike Moynihan or Danny Black or Rich Klein. We're just, squeaky wheels, and we'll go away, and people will still send in millions of cards. So we can't really affect their business model. I wish that didn't matter. It shouldn't matter. But honestly, I think that's what's going on here. They might try to appease him a little bit just to not make the squeaky wheel be too loud. But the reality is nobody's going to stop sending into PSA, including us. That's the sad thing, is that we're still sending into, as bad as they screwed this up. Hey, guilty. I got a whole order over here ready to go.
They shut down for years, and we couldn't wait to send it the second they opened.
Yeah.
And you know why you're going to send it to them? Because you're going to make more money selling the PSA. You're also a PSA guy. Everything, I don't want to say everything you have, but 95% of what you have is PSA. But you will also make more money on the overall basis with PSA too.
Yeah. And again, that's a hobby issue. Not necessarily, that's not PSA's fault that they sell for the most. They didn't, they don't create a secondary market. We do as hobbyists. And so until we change, that won't change. And I don't see we're like the Titanic. The hobby's like the Titanic. I mean, we move really slow, and that's okay. I'm not complaining about that. It's just we're slow to change and eager to bitch and moan and complain. I think Ty's very justifiable, by the way, in what he's just saying, look, this is an issue. This was a problem. It's not being fixed correctly. I don't have an issue with PSA. I just want him to fix the problem. That's basically his attitude towards it. And so that's all. I think we're over, actually. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Thanks to we didn't put as many comments up. It was great. The comment section was flowing. Thanks to everybody who participated. Thank you to Kevin for hopping on with us. Always good to have guests join in with differing opinions, because Danny has no good ones. So at least we had another one.
Well, I actually do like Will Clark.
Okay, good. That's a good opinion. Well, thanks everybody for watching. I hope you all have a great evening. And don't forget, Saturday Hobby Hotline, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll catch you guys later.